If you invest in like sinful stocks, you're probably actually going to outperform the market overall. Do they care about proof of work? Of course not. That's just the truth of it. How much freedom do you have to invest in whatever you want to protect your portfolio and your savings?
Can you crystallize your thoughts on ESG?
Yeah, I mean, so ESG is just another word for like political control of capital, right? So I'm in the capital allocation business. My job is to sort of generate returns for my investors. The objective of ESG is to add an additional mandate to anybody that invests, which is, okay, generate returns, but also you have to layer on these like political, restrictions on what you can do. And that's just fundamentally what it is. Now, a lot of people say, oh, no, like, Nick, you should be investing, with like a moral, eye. And to be clear, I do, right? I mean, the reason I am an investment professional is because I thought it was the highest leverage way to support Bitcoin. It's like, okay, what can I do? Can I code? No, I'm not going to, review commits on Bitcoin Core. Can I build magnificent bridges? No. Like, how am I going to contribute? Okay, high leverage way. Allocate capital to Bitcoin startups. That's obviously the number one best thing I could possibly be doing to advance Bitcoin. So I do invest with a moral eye, right? Like, of course it should be implicit as an investment professional. I think, you want to harmonize your views on how the world should be with what you do. And I'm very lucky in that I can do that. Now, if I was like a fixed income trader or something, it's like, well, you don't care about the substance of the bonds that you're buying and selling. It's like, oh, this is Tesla, Tesla debt that I'm buying. Oh, well, I don't like Tesla, so I'm going to refuse to buy. Like, most people in the investment industry can't care about what it is they're trading. It's just like, they're making money, and then if they want to be altruistic, maybe they can donate to charitable causes. I'm in a lucky position where I'm aligned, my sort of ideology and then my actual job. ESG is like a perversion of that, basically. Ultimately, the objective is, through the language of like altruism and good and ethics, is to commandeer the architecture of capital and take this private industry and effectively render it into an arm of the government. That's the objective, is to undertake a kind of a socialist takeover of what was a private industry, but is increasingly becoming public. So that's the idea. And then the theory of ESG from like promoters. Remember, there's a huge cottage industry of like ESG analysts and ESG appraisers. So like the reason that exists is just that. So that's like the reason ESG is so popular within like the asset management community, is because there's like a huge cottage industry in like evaluating it. Right? So it's just like simple economics. It is popular, people. Oh, you're right. So the theory of ESG, the theory to steelman it, is that you're going to make better allocative decisions if you layer on governance and environmentalism. It's like, oh, if I invest in clean energy stocks, that's going to do better than a portfolio of oil stocks. Not only is that wrong, the inverse is true. If you invest in like sinful stocks, you're probably actually going to outperform the market overall, because there's entities that are divesting. They're forced to divest from like oil and gas stocks and tobacco, right? So if you want to be the best possible, allocator, you have to be totally sort of like nihilistic with regards to like the moral contents of the things you're investing in. If you limit your investment universe to only companies you think are good for the world, that A, you're like artificially limiting your selection, and B, now you're competing with all the capital that can only invest in that subset. So if you now broaden, you're like, okay, I'll look at everything. you have tons of options, and you can invest in the disliked sectors that the government's like trying to tell you not to invest in. So, you know, then you're going to be buying a greater share of the cash flows of those real businesses. So you're actually going to outperform if you do like counter ESG. So the theory behind ESG that a lot of ESG pushers will allege, it's a bad theory. Like fundamentally, you know, limiting your investment universe and investing in pools that you know, the largest institutions in the world have to invest in this stuff. That's a great way to guarantee that your return's going to be bad.
Well, I dislike the idea that the government is essentially picking winners and losers, which has been increasingly the case. And I'm kind of curious your thoughts on just sort of really this intersection that we're experiencing of a new paradigm that Bitcoin represents, which is financial freedom and really truth based on this mathematical programming, versus the government system that's really headed more and more towards authoritarianism and socialism. Like, how do you think that when the two worlds really collide, what do you think that's going to look like? Is it going to be a chaotic battle to get us on the Bitcoin standard? Is it going to be peaceful? Is it going to take us a really long time? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the collision is happening right now. So, like, the EU has this whole thing where they want to ban Bitcoin because it has proof of work in it. Do they care about proof of work? Of course not. Of course not. Europeans that mine Bitcoin are doing so with relatively clean energy, right? So Europe should actually want all the Bitcoin to be mined in Europe if they care about the emissions. Why are they doing that? Because interest rates are negative, and because government debt is a bad thing to hold. That's just the truth of it. If you're living through financial repression, nobody in their right mind would hold a government security when inflation is 8% and interest rates are 2 or 3%, right? You're just guaranteed to lose money. So they have to force ways to get people to hold the government debt. And so that's what we're going to see in the next decade. They don't want people to hold alternatives like gold or Bitcoin, right? Because that is capital that is exiting the system, and it's not supporting the solvency of the government. So monetary repression, which is, you know, to be clear, what we are currently living through, it's happening right now, is a system where the government resets its balance sheet and deleverages by confiscating the savings of ordinary people. And, you know, so like that's happening, and they do it, you know, they'll like probably, you'll see a lot more regulations like forcing various financial institutions and pools of capital to hold more treasuries, you know. And so it's a battle, basically. Like the government wants to bail itself out, and they want you to hold and buy treasuries or like various forms of government debt, and they don't want you to hold the alternatives. So this whole thing we're seeing in the EU right now about banning Bitcoin, that's just a consequence of monetary repression.
Sure.
So this is like the battle of the next decade, right? And we had this in the 1940s, right? Every government was incredibly indebted after World War II, and you know, they had to let inflation run really hot, and they commandeered. Actually, they you know, there was still rationing and things like that. So it's like kind of what's happening now is going to be a bit of a throwback. You know, they had price controls on things.
Yield curve controls.
They did have yield curve control, yeah. They didn't call it that at the time. But so basically we're running back the 40s. If you were more pessimistic, you could say we're running back the 20s with the various hyperinflations in Europe. But so that's it, basically. It's like governments, it's always a tug of war, you know. How much freedom do you have to invest in whatever you want to protect your portfolio and your savings versus like what are the government's objectives in terms of achieving its own deleveraging? And you know, the different thing now as compared to like maybe the 30s when gold was banned is like it's very hard to control Bitcoin. You know, it's very distributed. But yeah, so we're going to see like the state doing these reprisals against the Bitcoiners and stuff like that. That's just like, that's inescapable, because a world where Bitcoin succeeds is a world where it disempowers the modern state. So that was always going to be part of the story. We could never have the sort of like peaceful way. Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on what's happening right now with the Fed trying to tighten and liquidity being withdrawn from the entire system? And, you know, many Bitcoiners in the space, Jeff Booth, who I talked to today, Lynn Alden, they think that they're going to keep tightening until something in the system breaks, essentially. And then the conclusion is they always print, right? But how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, it's fascinating to see like some of the most dovish members of the Fed turn into MAGA hawks.